Hey, I'm Greg. I'm excited to go over the new gear with you. So the first thing I do in unwinding the bar is I remove the end and lay it out. The lines are 20 meters long and they're folded in half. So we're rolling out 10 meters. And when I've unwound the bars, I want to leave my flying lines attached here to the end of the bar. And I want to separate the fold into lines. Where they fold back on themselves, it's a potential area for things getting twisted up. So this gets it all cleared out and ready to go. And the next thing I'll do is pump up my kite. There's a bladder inside this leading edge, and there's a Velcro ring inside which secures the bladder in place. We want to put our valve on just until it gently stops. You don't want to over crank on that until you have the kite fully inflated. Now that the kite's fully inflated, when I put this outer cap on, I can firm it up just a bit more. So I've wound out my bar, I've separated out that loop. The next thing I'm going to do is attach my lines to the kite. The lines are attached in this way, and the green side is markers match. So this is going to come off and go to this side and that side and your two fronts. So as I've just set it up, we'd be ready to go ride. If this is the first time using your bar, it's a good precaution, safety precaution, to go ahead and give your lines a check before your first ride. So I'm going to disconnect and check my line tuning. What I'm going to do is I'm going to connect all my lines through my harness connection pin. So once we've got all those 4 lines connected together, what we want to do is check our tuning. And this looks perfect. I've got the front and back lines at exactly the same length. You'll probably want to check this again after your first few sessions. There's been a bunch of updates on the cloud connection system, and the results are that there isn't as much settling in the initial first few rides on your session. And so I've done away with the series of knots for tuning. With the lower stretch line now, you might find you'll be moving these just a few millimeters. And so you can adjust this knot a smaller amount than moving a full knot. Some of the other changes on the system are, you'll notice on your front 2 lines now, there were some cases where the flagging line would stretch one front line slightly more or less than the other side. So there's now a knot on one front line, so you can fine tune adjust also the relationship of the front two line lengths. And as well, the upper ring stopper had been connected between the end of your sheeting line and the beginning of your flying lines, and it's now connected with a simple knot. It performs the same function, but you can move this knot to trim the location of the stopper to your personal preference. I'm running it about this far off the end. That's my personal preference for still having an unrestricted travel in my bar. But when I'm flying my kite and I spin my bar, it keeps everything under just a tiny bit of tension, and so the bar spins easier. But smaller riders with a shorter reach may want to shorten it a bit, and taller riders may want to lengthen it as a matter of personal preference. So as I set this down, I'm going to pay some attention to keep my lines organized, just as if I was connecting or disconnecting from my kite. As I walk back to my bar, notice that I'll make a clean loop in the lines as opposed to walking over them and getting the lines tangled. If you keep everything nice and organized, it makes separating the lines out after you've unwound your bar later much easier to separate that out where they fold in half. So to go over some of the updates on the lower end of this system, starting at my harness, there's lots of different preferences for how to connect to your harness. I put a few layers of fabric tape over the spreader bar that when I loop my harness connection around, it just gives it something to bite into and stay on center. There's a series of knots, and this is adjusting. As you adjust in or out these knots, what you're effectively doing is moving closer or farther the average position of your bar. And so it's a matter of your ergonomics while riding to be out or in. One friend likens it to moving the seat on your car to control your distance to the steering wheel. I think that's the most accurate analogy. I've been riding lately at roughly the width of my hand, just beyond that. The exception is for possibly a 10 and 13 meter kite, I might move in one knot. Not always, but sometimes, especially if a bit more powered up. But for all of my riding from 8 meter to 2.2 meter, from light on power to well powered up, I do all my riding on just that one knot. One of the other changes is the length of this connection was made just a bit longer, and the reason for that is to make it a little easier to open this loop larger, to make it easier to move over these knots. While I'm out riding, I can make this adjustment while I'm on the water. I'll just bring the kite down and rest it on a wingtip and let the bar out. And if you grab your upper flagging quick release, which is a push away, so if you pull that toward you, you can take the tension off your kite. And while the kite's on the water, you can make any adjustment if your bar is in an uncomfortable position. Another update for the CCS is this bit of line here. What this is for riders that would choose to add a secondary leash. It depends on where and how you ride. The system was originally designed for a single stage full release option, but in some riding situations where your kite getting away from you is a bigger danger than the safety of having an immediate release. A two-stage release of having a secondary leash may be the better option in those cases. And so that's what this attachment is for. It is not for connecting your harness connection. And the reason for that is if the ears of this quick release can pass through this loop or any larger ring of other systems, it's a potential jam and safety hazard. So this is only for a secondary leash, clip style handle pass leash, and your harness connection should go here. It's not, it's designed that it functions from either direction just as well. The shock cord on the lower full quick release was increased in diameter to be the same as the upper, as well as the longer travel of the lower quick release pin to reduce the likelihood of accidental trigger and release. That's most common with beginner hydrofoil riders on floaty boards where they're pulling the board up on its side, and it's possible for the rail of the board to come up and accidentally trigger this. Again, in such cases, a secondary leash would prevent the kite from accidentally releasing, but would require a two-stage release, which takes more time in an emergency. My recommendation in using the system is that in any event of danger is to first let the bar go and to immediately place your hands over the quick releases, and not to contemplate pushing or pulling full or flagging release, but just to be prepared to flag the kite. If the lines are wrapped around the bar, for any system where the flagging line travels through the center of the bar, which is pretty much all, there's a potential for your center lines to wrap around the bar and to disable the flagging depowering of the kite. So if you've pushed away and it's failed to depower the kite, then you can immediately pull in full release. To re-engage the line, if you reconnect your lower release, it makes it a little bit easier so you have something to pull the line against, so you can use two hands to reconnect your flagging line. I mentioned a moment ago the updated sheeting line. This is a different line material from Amsteel, and it's a much tighter weave and a smaller diameter. The tighter weave results in less sand getting in the system, which is a main contributor to line wear, both on the line and as well as on the bar itself. And it's also the tighter weave results in the lower stretch, which is why we need to make less initial tuning adjustment as we've ridden the bar the first few times. There's also been a slight redesign in the hole in the center of the bar. It's quite similar, but it's a slightly different shape, a little more oval and a little more rounded edge at the top, again to avoid line wear. The absence of bar ends is for several reasons. One being that the lower the swing weight, especially out at the end of the bars, the nicer the feeling. As well, the connection point being on the same plane as your hands has a different feeling in the bar and allows an easier twisting and a freer movement in the bar. As well, if the lines do get wrapped around the bar, it's very easy to just clear them. And especially some of the crazy ways we're riding and things can get all tangled up, it's much easier to untangle things in the water and straighten things out with less bulky parts on the bar. Not having bar ends requires that the rider pays attention to the indexing of the rotation of these back lines on the bar. The goal is that the center lines travel through the bar as cleanly as possible, not twisted and high friction like this. And so while I'm riding with a loose grip on the bar, I put a little bit of a twisting action on the bar. And so while I'm riding this bar the first few times, I actually twist this in place so that while I'm riding, I index it to the pressure, the twisting pressure I apply on the bar. So that's just something to be observant as you ride the system, and to set these to how you use it. So now I've checked my bar tuning and I know everything's perfect, and I've gone over the updates to the system and I understand all my safety. Let's go ride. As I showed you before, I've got my line set up like this. So I'm just going to take my green line. There's only one green line marker here. You can see I use my feet to step between the lines to keep everything organized. Once I've got the two sides connected, I can't mess up because twisting the center two is not a big problem. One of the things that's different about this kite is kites with struts. The struts kind of put some weight on the leading edge and hold it down on the beach. And in the absence of those struts, there's no weight, and it's very easy for the wind to pick this up and blow it away. So to keep it parked on the beach, basically what we're going to do is just keep this leading edge down. I don't want to put anything sharp or abrasive on it. So a lot of times I'll just put my bar across the leading edge and put some weight on that bar just to keep it down. If you were to like put some sand on your canopy, the problem with that is the leading edge is still very light and it'll shift the sand back on the canopy until it hot launches off the beach. So what we really want to do is just stay focused on keeping the leading edge down, either with our bar or any other non-abrasive item. Keep that leading edge down. So when I've finished my session and I'm packing up, I'll land my kite and I'll walk back to my kite with my bar, again making a nice clean loop, not walking over my lines, but make a nice clean loop, set my bar by my kite. And just out of habit, I always start on the right side of the kite. Again, I use my feet to keep the lines separated. I've got my center two and the right side. Then I step over these. I connect my other back. This one goes to this wingtip, that wingtip, and your two centers. Once I have these connected, it's not really a problem if these twist. That's just like spinning your bar. The only thing we need to avoid is sending the lines through like this. That would result in me needing to send my bar through the Y or other straightening. But once I've got it like this, it's secure. I come up, and on either side of the bar, I just put it under one of the bungees. I've got a whole lot of lines up at this end, so I take the one lonely line and go to center. And the previous bar had a neoprene cover over these side lines. One of the reasons I've left them exposed for this bar is so that you can see this connection, and this is going to become your line winder. So I take all my lines and I come around once, and with the second wrap I set it right there in my knot as my line winder. And again, one time, and I set it through the knot on the other side. Once, twice, once, twice. With each wrap, I'm going outboard of the previous. And you can see as I'm winding this in, that loop stays nice and clean. I'm not introducing any twists or tangles, so that when I am ready for my next session and I unwind it, this loop is nice and clean and accessible. When I get down to about the last wrap length of a bar, then I might just go around loosely, secure everything down in place, come up over the end, lock it in place. You're good to go. If you're using your cloud with a different bar that has the opposite connection for loops and knots, the connections on the kite or on the cloud are designed to be reversible. So here we have a loop, sorry, here we have a knot. What you can do is just send that through, and you can reverse it so you have a loop facing down. Switch it back. Now we're not facing down. The same on the front. Here we have a loop. If your flying lines need a knot, now I have a knot facing down. And back to a loop. When I'm packing up my kite, I prefer not to let the air rush out super fast. So I hold a little tension on the valve and I just ease the air out. Part of the reason for that is there's a rubber gasket right here, and if we let the air rush out with force, it can blow this rubber gasket off. And while we're looking at this part of the valve, take note of this one-way gasket. You can see if I push it out of place and it's not seated properly, or if there's sand or other debris in this one-way gasket, this is the main cause for slow leaks. If you're losing air in your kite at any time, this is the first place to look. And if I get that back in place, that's where she needs to be seated. When I pack her up, I just put her back under this cap to avoid abrasion to the kite. And I like to start rolling right from the wingtips to get all the air out of the kite. And then I roll her here a couple folds from the end. There we go.